Authority. We're going to begin tonight as we do each week with the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'd like to invite our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight is going to be led by Mr. Jeff Dorso. All right, the council did meet in closed session this evening to confer with our legal counsel regarding existing litigation, the city versus Wiley, Umstead, and others. No action was taken. And to confer with our labor negotiator regarding evaluation, public employee appointment evaluation dismissal, blah, 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 for the city manager. All right, with that, we're going to proceed to item 1A, which is presentations by the public. This blah, 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 blah is a sanctioned legal term in Ghana. So we're going to proceed to item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the city council. And we do ask that anyone wishing to address the council on this or any other item this evening to please fill out one of the yellow cards and turn it into the city clerk. In front of the clerk is a timer that we use to make sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard. And to that end, we ask that all comments be limited to no more than 3 minutes. We also recognize that for some folks, speaking in public can present some anxiety, and so we do ask that there not be any boos or catcalls or applause or other demonstrations, and that we try to maintain a civil discourse in the chambers. We take the yellow cards up until the conclusion of the staff report. Once the staff report is finished and we turn to council discussion and public testimony, we don't take any additional cards. So if you're intending to provide any testimony tonight on an item, turn on the card as soon as possible, but certainly before the conclusion of the staff report on that item. All right, with that, we have one request to speak under item 1A, and it's by Mr. Bill Lowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. William Lowell of West Sacramento for the record. And this morning on Channel 31, they were announcing that Raley's is filing for bankruptcy, although I understand at that time they just told about an Elk Grove Bel Air market being closed. I don't know what the status of the local Raley's market is, but I was a little disturbed about that. And also, when I was checking by Assemblyman Roger Dickinson's office earlier this week, why his assistant was telling me that there's a move to incorporate West Sacramento as part of what would be the district that includes, I guess, downtown Sacramento. And I hadn't heard anything about that locally, but when I shared that with an older neighbor of mine, his first reaction was, yeah, Sacramento wants to get their hands on our retail sales tax dollars and so forth. And so, but he did state that a bridge between Southport and South Sacramento would be one of his main goals, so which I strongly agree with, of course. So food for thought, as they say. And another problem, I've been having a lot of problems getting to and from or to Woodland by way of Davis, that is the 42A bus during peak hours. Seems like most of the time our bus is pretty packed up by the time, say if I just want to go to West Capitol Avenue from my place. And so I would suggest that since there are 4 buses per hour, number 45 express to Woodland, anybody else in a position like that, from now on, I'm going downtown Sacramento during those peak hours and taking the number 45 instead of getting passed up because that 42A is too crowded. And then I think we should reassess things and advise people, if they're going to Woodland during those peak hours, to go to downtown Sacramento first and so forth. And let's see. And that that is pretty much it, except that we need to, those express buses to Davis, I don't remember how many of those, if any of those go more than once an hour, but it should be examined, and again, the public should be notified, and therefore, let's advise them accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. All right, that's the only request we had under item 1A, so we're going to proceed to item 1B, which is council communications. Are there any reports or other communications this evening? Mr. Johannesson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The West Sacramento Housing Development Corporation met on December 15th. Other than routine items of reporting on the different properties, they did move to enter a power purchase agreement with the company that's providing the solar panels, which will provide a $25, it looks like, per month benefit to the units there, which will help those units be more competitive. On, I get the date here, on December 8th, I'm trying to find the date this was, hold on a second. The Delta Protection Commission met on December 8th. I was the alternate that attended the meeting. The two main items there, there's an economic stability plan that the commission is tasked to report to the Delta Stewardship Council, that the committee decided to reconsider that in light of some of the fringe economic benefits on the fringe areas, including the secondary zone. And so what they're looking for are comments by the different jurisdictions on really how the secondary zones help support the Delta Protection Plan, and also the economic issues that are surrounding that. For West Sacramento, of course, we'd have the port greening, the sustainable solutions policy, what we're doing with the levees, but we also have the issues of the development on both sides of the river and the continued urbanization to create more of an urban core in this area. So they're looking for comments at this point. Stockton presented a letter. Actually, it was a letter with a huge number of stakeholders in the Stockton area. They're in a little more difficult predicament because actually the city of Stockton is in the secondary zone, and it's a huge impact to them. West Sacramento, of course, is in the secondary zone as well. So I guess the main point of this is to be sure that we've got comments going, appropriate comments. I know that the mayor's on that too. So that's it.
Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 3 items to report on. This past Monday, the 9th, there was a meeting of the Water Resources Association of Yolo County up in Woodland, where there's only 2 items really of consequence. One was an update on the Davis Woodland Joint Water Project in JPA, where I mainly just kept my head down and enjoyed the briefing as those 2 work out their, but it's a very important update on their surface water project and the intake, an update on the intake facility that's being built and is currently on schedule. So that was a good part of the meeting. There was also, though, some discussion, which I'll probably follow up with staff on later, where there was a good deal of discussion around using that forum to ensure that all the participating jurisdictions, tying back to the Delta issues, sort of feed in as a sort of warehouse of information issues that the participating jurisdictions of the association can voice their opinions on, so that if they're in other meetings or talking with other agencies around Delta issues, they're aware of what our issues on. And I thought that was a good use of the time for the Water Resources Association. So there'll probably be more action on that in the coming months. Following that meeting on the 9th, I attended the SACOG meeting in Davis for elected officials, where they gave an update and an overview of the MTP and Sustainable Community Strategy, which the mayor has been briefing us on over the past, how long? A while. But anyway, so it was a good discussion. The theme of the plan is around more with less, which will be a theme for the rest of the night, I think. But it was a good discussion outlining the key issues and the principles of the transportation plan. It was attended by myself from West Sacramento only, and Mr. McGowan, our supervisor from Yolo County, was also there. So it was a good discussion. We heard some specifics on Yolo County projects, and so we're good to go there. This morning I did attend the Yolo Solano Air Quality Management District board meeting. Just one item that at the end of the month, the staff, you should be receiving notification about applications for the Clean Air Funds program. That process starts at the end of the month. Last year, I think I reported out that we didn't have a whole lot of participants coming from Yolo County. I think the Yolo County Transit was the only one who really put in an application. So we had some leftover funds that are rolling into this year. So again, keep an eye out for that, because I think that's something that the city will want to look for opportunities for, as well as members of the chamber might be interested as well, because businesses can't qualify for some of those funds. So anyway, that's what I have. Thank you.
Mr. Christoph.
Yeah, the December meeting of the JPA for flood control met, and two major items, well, two items were really important. Nothing really concrete took place, but one of the items was the buttoning up and putting the South River Road project to rest, so to speak, for the winter. We've continued to do work up there, and we've got it all winterized, and so everything is in essence moving forward. That project should be done this coming fall. And then the other issue, of course, is the one that a number of property owners are concerned that are further south. And in that particular one, we're probably going to do a task order 4. We had 3 in the past, but we're probably going to do a 4. We're trying to find every way possible to see if we can accommodate some of the property owners down there, at the same time bringing forth a good levee stabilization plan and flood control plan to protect all 48,000 people that we have here in the city. We have a meeting tomorrow, and so I want to make that announcement. We have a meeting tomorrow, and we're still not done with Task Order 4, but at the same time, we'll get a briefing on the others, and we'll see what we can eventually come up with to make everything as smooth as we possibly can. There's certain trying times, but at the same time, we'll try to do everything we can to make things work.
Thank you, Mr. Christoph. Mayor Pro Tem Villegas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Monday, the Yolo County Transportation District met. Nothing major to report, but did attend that meeting. And then earlier today, as part of the representative for the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District, the district itself received a presentation, mostly just an update, as the council is aware, and I've kept you apprised of the progress on the rate increase as we move forward with compliance with the projected costs of the the work that's going to be needed on the plant in order to comply with our MPDS permit from the state. One of the things that we struggled with, obviously, is kind of how to balance, and I think there was an article in the paper, if not an editorial in the Sacramento Bee maybe a week or two ago, about sort of how to manage the increase in rates for residential, commercial, and industrial. And so as part of the subcommittee, we've been struggling with kind of how to manage that. The one thing that's obvious, that I think is obvious, at least it is to me, is that the industrial rates are going to have to increase in order to keep pace with our costs. And so the committee, the full board received an update or a presentation, a workshop presentation today, and it's clear that the rates are going to have to go up for industrial users. But because of the way the formula is going to be driven, at least proposed to be driven, is not so much the way residential rates are, which are based on the units. So for example, there's a house, there's a unit cost, and it's sort of a flat cost, and that rate will increase proportionate to the cost of the construction. In the industrial world, it's going to be based largely, at least it's proposed to be based largely on flow, the amount of flow, and then the components within that flow that are causing, in large part, a portion of the cost of the construction. So more to be had on that, but that's just sort of an update on where that's headed at the moment. But like I said, the district received an update on on that piece of the rate increase. And then earlier this evening, some of us were present. The Port Commission met. Actually, a good meeting. We had a couple items. We're now partners with the Clean Air Partnership. We are giving the nod to the staff to move forward on the habitat restoration project that's going to take place near Prospect Island. And then we also gave the nod on an agreement potentially with the Sierra Northern Railroad for consideration of sale of some property in the port for future rail capacity and location of a clean fuel facility. That's it.
Just a quick question, if I may. I noticed in the paper also today where Sac Regional is suing the state to see if there's a way to reduce the costs of this $2 billion plan. And I guess the question I had, I received 2 calls on it, and one of the calls had asked, why are you going to sue Sac Regional when you probably aren't going to have a favorable ruling, and you're just wasting that money as far as the suit goes? And so that was a question that was asked me, and I'm going, okay, well, you know, we're trying to do everything that we possibly can to keep the rates down, because our rates are going to go up. As a property owner, you're going to see an increase, not only this year, or not only next year, but the year after, and then the year after, and we're trying to keep them as low as we possibly can, but that was the only answer I could come up with, and I was hoping that you may be able to work with staff next time you go there to see if there is a way in which we may be able to either be successful and get those rates reduced, I mean, get that $2 billion figure reduced, or come up with some other kind of plan.
Well, yeah, as you know, the district did appeal the initial ruling, but I think as the mayor has indicated, with his experience on the regional water quality control board and his experience at the state level, those appeals are often not successful.
Correct.
But I think we felt, at least the staff did, that there was sufficient reason to at least, make a case for why we felt that there were some things that were overreaching, in large part because of the cost of the permit and these sorts of permits for the discharge of our treated sewage is not. It's a bit unprecedented in terms of the level of treatment that's going to be required in this plant, and so we felt that there is at least caused for I don't know if it's a lawsuit, but it's more of an appeal of the initial ruling from the state board. So I think it's important. I mean, I don't, in terms of the cost, it's minor relative to what the cost is going to be for the ratepayers in the next, in the next go round. So it certainly, I think the board was unanimous in its attempt to at least try to make a case for why we think it's should be reconsidered, at least part of it. And there's different elements that we've appealed.
Okay, I'll report that back.
The only report I make is this morning, Congresswoman Matsui invited us over to give hour-plus briefing on flood issues for the city, flood protection, levee improvements, FEMA mapping, 404, the whole deal. It would have been a 4-hour briefing with any other member of Congress, but because she has such a high level of familiarity with these exact same issues, from SAFCA and Natomas in particular, she already understands the language. It was a very deep, very good briefing on that whole range of topics, and we've identified some additional paths that we might pursue. She, as for Mr. Lowell and the rest of the audience, Congresswoman Matsui is not our congresswoman, but we anticipate that she will be, since the new district lines that give us Assemblyman Dickinson, Senator Steinberg, and Congresswoman Matsui take effect in the coming this year. So as a productive meeting, we're going to meet with their Washington folks as well. Mr. Panos and I will be in D.C. next week. I have a meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, but we also have a dozen or so meetings with the Corps and FEMA and our Senate and congressional delegation and others, principally on flood issues, some port issues, and our other priorities, but 99% of it's on flood. So we'll report back on progress after that meeting. All right, item 1C is appointments. We don't have any this evening to make, so that brings us to the consent agenda, which is items 2 through 5. With any item on consent any member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for separate question or comment? Seeing none, is there a motion on the consent agenda?
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Johannesson and seconded by Mr. Ledesma. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. Before we move to our time set agenda, I'm going to, without objection, switch items 8 and 7 in the order on the agenda. So we'll proceed to item 8 as soon as we're completed item 6. So item 6 is the Community Development Block Grant Public Hearing for closeout of Grant 09 PTAE 6302 and submittal of Business Resource and Innovation Center study.
I think it was on before.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. We're here tonight to receive public comment regarding the closeout of CDBG Grant 09 PTAE 6302, which provided funding for the Business Resource and Innovation Center study. Staff is also here to request that the City Council accept the study final report, Attachment 1, for submittal to the California Department of Housing and Community Development. As the council may recall, the grant study was designed to address the need for technical assistance that businesses had expressed to staff over the past few years. The study concludes that a physical resource center is not the best method to address the need for business resources, and it identified key actions to improve awareness and use of resources by key business groups using delivery methods that they prefer. These actions include online resources and reorganizing them by market segment, with an emphasis on micro and small businesses, which make up 79% of the city's business community, improving city business resource communications, and accelerating city outreach to middle market and major employers. The final study report before you tonight is essentially the same report that was provided to you on December 7th, with the revisions to address the EDAC's comments as well as City Council comments. At the last meeting, council members requested that staff prepare a list of implementation activities for council consideration in future strategic planning processes. This is included as attachment 2 in your packet and is a separate implementation document for further discussion and action by the city following acceptance of the study report. With that, I would be happy to address council questions and comments regarding the Business Resource Center and Innovation Study, the final report, and attachment 2 prior to the public hearing. This concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Richards before we proceed to the public hearing? Mr. Johannesson.
Just quickly on the on your attachment 2, I think what we wanted to do is have some idea of if the effort we're putting in is doing anything beneficial. And it looks like we have measurements here. It looks like as far as the goals, it would be, I guess, the purpose column. That would be what you're trying to achieve with these different activities. So, for example, the city website is to improve access via the internet. So there's not really a goal there. It's really, that's kind of explains the process. So, one of the things I'd like to see is, over a course of time, is access being improved, or is a goal to have access improved by 200% or whatever, or a certain period of time, so whether or not you're meeting these goals. I'm not really sure that I see this here. You've got measurements, but the measurements are to what?
The website analytics will tell us how many hits and how many individual viewers are viewing those pages, and a number of other.
You're measuring something, but how does the number of hits meet? How do you know if it's meeting a goal? What are the goals for hits, for example? That kind of thing. So, you can measure all these things, but you've got to compare them with something, I would think. But
I understand your point. I believe that the website analytics will allow us to demonstrate that we're improving access by the number of visitors to the site, as well as the number that are accessing specific events as well as clicking on resources to make appointments with different providers that we hope to have on there. But we'll take your comments into consideration when we have further discussion on this implementation action following.
I just think you need to have some goals, like,
Okay.
some number or something that you're trying to reach and see how you're reaching that. Just suggestion.
Thank you.
Other questions at this time? All right, then, thank you. We're going to open the public hearing on item 6. We have no slips on it, but because it is a legal public hearing, does anyone wish to address the council on this item? Seeing none, we're going to close it. You don't have to, but seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing and return to the council for any further questions or discussion. Well, I want to echo Mr. Johannessen's point. I appreciate the work to put the table together. It is helpful, and I'm relying a lot on both Mr. Ledesma, who has a lot of deep experience in this sector, and EDAC and our staff. It feels squishy. The whole thing feels squishy to me in terms of what we're actually delivering in terms of small business support and development. But maybe that's the nature of the work. So, and there are others who have much more background in the direct delivery of those services. But I think at the policy level, those are exactly the questions that we need to be able to connect the dots between the activities that are being performed and how they're actually leveraging meaningful, successful business and profit and durability. And those are the kinds of indicators that I'm interested in. I mean, the website analytics we should be tracking those, and it's a good tool. But I think Mr. Johansson is right. Leading up to how as we're looking at business retention, business recruitment, and innovation and entrepreneurship, drawing some indicators at that level that we can then link to some of these activities and tasks. So, Mr. Ledesma.
Yeah, and I agree with your points, and I think one of the things, and Diane, thanks for the work, and you were responsive to our needs, and I think we're looking on the study and how it, measuring the success of these businesses in our community is a tough thing, and that no one has quite figured out, because small businesses, large business, they're so varied. I think the report took the right approach in breaking it down to sizable chunks that you can manage, and I think that's the first step. So I don't know if, they do feel squishy. I agree with that, but I think as long as we are tying it back to kind of what the needs are for those specific groups, because I remember we were looking at smaller businesses, emerging businesses, and the rest are escaping me in the report. But I think that's this is a tough segment a lot of these are a tough segment to measure, and their effectiveness, because every business has something different that they need and fill. So, but we do need to have some, and I agree with that. So as we can focus in a little bit more, I think we'll be off to a good start. And maybe the way to approach it is get some data for 6 months or a year, and then you can revise them and look for better measurements.
All right, further discussion? All right, then is there a motion?
Oh, we have to make. I'll make the motion. So moved.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. That brings us to item 8 by prior order, which is a workshop and recommendations regarding West Sacramento's financial strategy in light of the Supreme Court decision related to the future of redevelopment agencies.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council.
And just as a reminder, because I know we have some folks here who have been very active in this work, of our unique council policy, which is if you are intending to address the council on this item, please fill out one of the yellow cards and return it before Aaron is done talking.
And I'll be
Thanks.
sort of brief. So. Well, the purpose of tonight's workshop is to update the council and receive direction on the city's strategy related to continuing economic development and capital investment in light of the diminished financial resources we face caused by actions of the state and to another extent, the overall economic challenges. This isn't a topic that's new to the city council, but to say the least, we've had a few significant happenings in the last couple of months that have brought this to the forefront, so we wanted to provide the council with an update on those items since we last had a workshop in September. So that said, I'll be covering 3 main areas in my presentation. The first is I'll give a brief overview of the status of the issues related to redevelopment and how they affect our financial strategy going forward. Secondly, I'll provide an update on staff's plan to identify new resources to carry on the strategic investment activities that were traditionally funded by the redevelopment agency, and to a greater extent increasing the overall revenue to the city for the benefit of the entire community. And lastly, I'll provide a bit of information about on how these items are related to the work of the mayor's Pro-West Sacramento advisory team chaired by Councilmember Ledesma before I conclude for council discussion. So by now, I think everyone is very familiar with the Supreme Court's decision on the fate of redevelopment agencies and the turmoil it's caused throughout the state. There are still a lot of legal uncertainties about how it will be implemented and legislative strategies to delay it or reconstitute redevelopment. We touched on that a little bit in the report. But for now, we know that we're working in a new world of jargon like successor agency and enforceable obligations. And as we go through the dissolution process, we're getting familiar with that. I'm not going to cover all the technical issues involved in the agency dissolution process tonight, but I will point out that we provided a couple of attachments in the staff report, one showing the actions that we've already taken with regard to agency dissolution, and the other is a more general description of the dissolution process and the roles of the various entities in that process. And then lastly, the city attorney has provided a legal alert on the Supreme Court decision itself. So if there's questions on those items, we're definitely here to answer those. The only technical piece I'll touch on right now is in the recommended actions, there's a recommended election by the city council to retain the housing assets of the former agency. And the reason this is before you tonight is because in the legislation, there's a deadline of January 13th by which the city council of the city that created the agency would have to elect to not retain those assets. But it's recommended generally that you take action, affirmative action, to elect to retain the assets. And just for clarification, what we mean by that, it's a $25 million loan portfolio of all the loans that we made to affordable housing developers over the past 25 years. There's some long-term maturity dates with those, obviously, but in staff's analysis, it would be prudent to retain those assets simply because of the potential future revenue they represent. If we don't retain or elect to retain the assets under the legislation, they would revert to the county housing authority. And the last thing I'll mention in terms of the dissolution process is that the city manager has formed a task force of staff to address the various requirements of the city as successor agency. And just to highlight that you'll be seeing quite a few items coming forward after the dissolution date of February 1st related to that process. So enough with the bad news about the redevelopment agency dissolution. As I alluded to earlier, this is a new topic, and this isn't something that we've been unprepared to deal with. In fact, West Sac has set itself apart in many ways from other cities because for months we've been dealing with the real possibility of losing the agency. With that in mind, we've been taking steps to protect the agency's assets, to complete financial analyses to understand the impacts to the city budget, and got ourselves organized and ready to comply with the provisions of the legislation related to dissolution. But beyond that, we got proactive in thinking ahead to the future of economic development and capital investment in West Sacramento. In September, the mayor formed the Pro-West Sac advisory team, as I mentioned, chaired by Councilmember Ledesma, to begin the process of exploring ways for the city to continue economic development activities and investments in infrastructure. And as a parallel to that, at the staff level, we wanted to get our staff ready to receive direction from the council based on the recommendations of the Pro-West Sac committee. So we formed what we're calling our community investment team. That's a temporary name, at least for now. The purpose of this committee is to identify ideas that could be financial programs or programmatic in nature or regulatory ideas with the idea that we're coming up with ways to provide new revenue, financial tools, and resources for the city to continue to meet its community investment objectives. And those objectives, we've also taken some time to go through what we mean by that. And it's really a set of things that the city has always done, and redevelopment was a big part of accomplishing those. So we're talking about things like strategic investments in infrastructure, that when we mean both new infrastructure, but also maintaining what we already have, or replacing the upgrade existing infrastructure. Providing matching funds for grants. As you know, the redevelopment agency was a big part of providing match on grants and has really fueled the success of the overall success of the grant program. And then also strategies to increase sales tax and property tax, looking at what we have now and how we can maximize those resources. Funding public facilities, and that includes everything from public safety to city facilities. And establishing a fund, a long-term fund, to finance those activities. With the loss of redevelopment, we feel that that's going to be extremely important to have a sustainable source to fund community investment activities. As I mentioned, a lot of the things that we had done related to that were supported by a redevelopment tax increment. With the loss of that resource, it's one of our greatest challenges to balance the loss of that tool. So the committee is made up of representatives from all city departments, and the idea was to bring together a range of perspectives and disciplines to discuss the concepts and really get to identifying what the most promising ideas are and how they apply to those objectives, and move to the next steps of implementation, which would include identifying legislative actions that might be necessary and next steps to setting up different programs. And the direction we received tonight from the council and the recommendations of the Pro-West Act team will inform our direction with that committee. But we're at the point right now where we're ready to move to next steps in terms of really putting a lot of resources into researching some of these ideas and potential tools, with the short-term goal of delivering to the council an action plan with recommended next steps. By about May, we're hoping to have it ready in time for the upcoming budget year, because we know that the time frame needs to be quick on this. So as I mentioned, the plan will have specific recommendations, and really the ultimate goal there is to create a new paradigm for the city, to give the city what it needs to continue community investment with the loss of the agency, and again, in the face of our overall economic challenge. And lastly, I know that several representatives from the Pro-West Act team are here tonight to discuss the group's findings, but I'll just point out that their preliminary conclusions are summarized in your staff report. And as I conclude, I'll also mention that this morning, Toby and I attended the West Sacramento Chamber of Commerce's Economic and Government Affairs Committee meeting to give that group an update on the status of these items. And actually, I'll be continuing to attend those meetings on a monthly basis to provide an update to that group, and hopefully in the process receive some valuable private sector perspective as well. So at this time, that concludes my presentation. Turn it over to the council for the workshop.
Okay, great. Are there sort of quick questions for Aaron? I'm going to turn over in a second to Mr. Ledesma to describe the recommendations of the team as well. But they're instant questions. Aaron's not going anywhere, but there's... Okay, great. Let me then ask Councilmember Ledesma, who has been leading since the early part of the fall with a really distinguished group of citizens and business leaders and community leaders. This Pro-West Act team, the post-redevelopment options for West Sacramento team. You don't need to stand up if you don't want to, Aaron. To try to look at the big policy questions, one of which was mooted by the Supreme Court decision, but really to get down to brass tacks about what to do next. We have raised our voices in loud opposition to what occurred. We've described in painful detail for the legislature, the courts, the media, and others what we saw as the consequences. But that's now the history. Now we need to figure out what do we do next, and bring a little bit of our West Sacramento pragmatism married with West Sacramento chutzpah back to the table again, and come up with a new strategy. And so that team of folks, which when called, down to the person, I think Mr. Ledesma may relate this, but down to the person within 60 seconds agreed to participate and to give their time and expertise to an effort. They didn't know what was going to come of it. They've all been on task forces before that didn't lead to anything, and they were willing to do this. And I just, before Mr. Ledesma describes their recommendations, I really want to say thank you. Many of the team members are here this evening, but to say thank you for willing to do that, and then for putting the real time and the sweat equity and the creativity into that analysis and into many of the proposed strategies and solutions that Mr. Ledesma is going to describe in just a moment. We're really blessed in our community that folks locally and regionally were prepared to step up in that way, and it has given us already a significant head start compared to communities all across the state in terms of both responding to the decision, but also to really charting an effective new path. So, Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll too start by thanking the members that are here for coming tonight and also for participating over the last few months as we kind of work through some of the issues. You mentioned that some of the folks knew about the redevelopment or wanted to participate, and I think one of the early benefits of this was all of us were educated probably tenfold about what the program meant to the city, and their passion and engagement in this process grew even more the more they learned about what it meant. I mean, I know you, my colleagues on the council, have been stewards of our redevelopment agency and our efforts to rebuild our city, and from where we've come, and unfortunately has to end with the dissolution of that agency. But the respect that the team had and acceptance in this certainly reflected on the work you've done, because it was absolutely what they identified with as the success of West Sacramento is the work you laid before them. So I thank you for setting the table, for at least getting the can-do attitude that we needed and the group accepted. I'll quickly go through. I know some of you are here, but the members of the committee were, again, I was the chair, but we also had Meg Arnold from the Sacramento Area Regional Technology Alliance join us. Grant Deary, who is here, joined our group. Jeff Dorso, who's a local attorney and also West Sacramento resident. Jack Ennis from CalSTRS joined us and hosted us at his offices a few times, and we thank him for that. Mark Friedman, who we're familiar with from the Fulcrum property, joined us. Lon Hadamia joined us as well, an economist and economic development expert, so we thank him for his service. Barbara Hayes from the Sacramento Area Trade and Commerce Organization, SACTO, joined us. I should also point out that she was instrumental in bringing in Ryan Sharp from the Center for Strategic Economic Research, and I think somebody's going to speak on behalf of one of the groups about what that group brought to bear that could benefit the city. PG&E was represented with James Moranti and Clay Schmidt, both came in, but they're a valuable partner. Wells Fargo was there in addition to myself, but Donald Terry, who's the head of their local community development group. And then we had a couple of folks that came in during the process to help with this task. I should also point out we had on the team, I'm sorry, I forgot a couple of people, Mr. Bob Murphy, joined our team. Thank you very much. Val Toppenberg, and of course Denise Seals and her team over the chamber. Thank you for helping out. The approach of the team was pretty simple. We spent the first meeting getting downloaded on the issue, and then the team started debating issues. And one of the first things they identified that had to be done is what did the redevelopment agency do before that it has to be replaced. And the approach we took was splitting off into three teams. One looked at reviewing, surveying what other communities are doing with economic development programs with redevelopment, or those states even that weren't doing that were doing economic development and more community investment work without a redevelopment program. Washington being the most obvious one that we looked at. That was our competitive edge group. We also had a team that looked at the entities and the structures that the city has that could replace the agency should it go away. And then we had another team that looked at the financing portion of the loss of the tax increment financing, at least from the redevelopment agency, and what other opportunities there might lie. We split off. Everyone did a lot of work, a lot of phone calls. We came back together at the end of October and started putting together some preliminary conclusions. I'm going to read off some of them, and I think some of the team members have asked to speak tonight and are going to address maybe some more specifics. The city was, the task force was working in the context of a opt-in, opt-out scenario. About two meetings in, our dear friend in the community from representing the chamber, Mr. Deary, asked ever so politely if they could weigh in on what the city should do on opt-in or opt-out. So at the last meeting, they came to a conclusion that the city should opt out of the redevelopment program, either at the time, thinking now or later. Of course, the Supreme Court ruling no longer makes that applicable, but it was more of a consensus of the team that with the state's current situation, that the redevelopment program would be tenuous at best to continue on and not a sustainable model. With that, they knew the work that would have to be done to make up for it, and they were more than willing to jump in. But that was a key area that they were bold enough to step up and say that they were willing to go along with the ride to help find the solutions necessary. They also are, in wake of the Supreme Court ruling, have asked the city to be cautious of any efforts going forward with the state, any revision of the redevelopment program, that we should monitor that with some skepticism and cautiousness because the budget issues aren't going away. So before we enter into a partnership, I think they might articulate this as they come up, but they felt that that was something we needed to be cautious of. One of the other key findings we had during one of the meetings, we had a visit from an economist, Dr. Robert Fountain, who was with the Sac State for a while and does a lot of work in economic development in Northern California. And he just challenged the group a bit to think about where the economy is today and where this recession is today, making it plainly clear, and the group, I think, picked up on it, that regardless of the state actions, a new model for redevelopment and community investment was needed anyway. The bond market wasn't there on the redevelopment bonds because it's not there at all because there's no redevelopment agencies. But that we would have to find new mechanisms for funding. I'm glad that Laren's here and they've started the work as well. But the finance team started looking at some different models and started brainstorming some ideas of where we can go. But the overall arching idea from the task force was there would have to be a new model, and we would have to lead the way in trying to find that. Because the redevelopment agency goes away, one of the findings the group wanted to communicate to the council is that there will be no longer one tool that we need to pull from, but we'll need a whole toolbox. One of the things that the Center for Economic Research brought to bear was a number of programs that are available in the state. Some of them we're active in, some of them we're not. A number of programs, a number of agencies, a number of other private lender programs that we would have to incorporate. We would have to become a master of all programs to mix and match per our needs. We have a list of some programs that are available. We'll be putting that together in our final report to come out at the end of January. But it was the group wanted to articulate that certainly we would be needing to be a master of many different programs and not just go to the one agency as we've been used to. So we have some findings on that. I'll jump to just a couple of other general findings that I want to get to. The team did want to make sure that any redevelopment assets be utilized for future funding of redevelopment and community investment. And additionally, that any revenue, they recommended any additional revenue that flows back to the general fund should be reserved for economic development, redevelopment, or community investment as it was intended with redevelopment. I think that was a strong point that they wanted to communicate to the council as a direction of where they would see it to go. Finally, and I'm sure you'll hear this from some of the speakers that may come up, the task force wanted to reemphasize to the council and to the city that the city's success in using redevelopment has proven to be its greatest strength. They acknowledged, and West Sacramento in general has acknowledged, that our political and municipal leadership experience and vision and expert staff has been the credible partner and will be the credible partner going forward in our future economic development. So they really saw the redevelopment agency as the byproduct of a good council and good leadership. And they wanted this group to be aware of that because of its can-do attitude, the culture we've built, that's who people want to partner with and not a redevelopment agency, which gave it the confidence to urge to opt out. But the state has taken away that option. So that is something that they want to make sure was communicated. So again, our time frame is we'll be putting together a report. A gentleman is here who's been very helpful, Andrew Sternfels. I've been working with the last month or two. He's joined our committee. He'll be helping me put together in the task force the final report with all our information we gathered, some more specific recommendations. But I'm going to let some of the advisory team members, I know some of them had asked to speak, to be able to provide you with more background and more information. And that's it for now.
If there's no objection, we'll take all of our comment cards are from the team. First is Bob Murphy, our former city attorney and a statewide expert all of these issues of land use, finance, and economic
At
development.
least a year ago. Mayor Kabbalah, members of the council, Bob Murphy, thank you very much. As Councilmember Ledesma said, we were broken into various teams, and our team was charged to take a look at the current role and powers of existing city entities to see what existed either alone and in combination could be used both short-term and long-term to step in to the RDA's role. As has just been mentioned, we really conclude there is no one-stop shop that's going to replace the RDA. But I think the good news for West Sacramento, and really is not surprising, is there are various combinations and alternatives that exist right now in the city that could be examined by the city as vehicles in some combination. And let me just spend a couple of moments identifying a couple of those for you. One is the obvious one that you've just had a port meeting. The port exists there. I think this council and the port board certainly are well aware that it has broad commerce powers that exist both within its boundaries and adjacent to its boundaries, including the ability to work with property owners in acquiring and leasing lands back and forth. Within that combination, it also has some existing financing powers that could be tweaked. Could be used short-term and could be tweaked long-term legislatively to enhance that without affecting its maritime powers whatsoever. I think that most of you are also aware that the port at one time created its own financing corporation, a private corporation. That exists. It existed for the specific purpose of doing warehouse leasing and lease financing. That's a vehicle very similar to an economic development corporation. So the question might exist whether you really have an economic development corporation or in fact you have a vehicle that already exists that you could start working with right away. There's the question of seeding those things with funding, et cetera, but we didn't even got that deep into it. You also have another public entity, the West Sacramento Financing Authority. That's a joint powers authority between you, the city currently, and what was the redevelopment or what will be the past redevelopment authority. It will need some tweaking, but it has very broad financing and development powers, certainly for infrastructure, if not private development with some tweaking. There are some other vehicles that do not currently get utilized by the city but exist in the law. One is infrastructure financing districts, and I know your staff's taken a good hard look at that. That's another tax increment vehicle, exists in state law, doesn't have all of the implications that concerned some people with the existing RDA with regard to other taxing entities, and can be done not necessarily citywide, but can be done in definite developing areas to help finance infrastructure. And you may be aware the city of San Francisco, city and county of San Francisco just used that this last fall to help some of its port structures in preparation for the America's Cup coming up later this year and next fall. So they've already used it, coming right out of last fall, out of the legislature with some tweaking. Economic development corporations that exist in many places. We did not go too deep into them. We know the most recent example is in Roseville. The issue with those, of course, is tweaking them. So I think the news from our group, to summarize, is you're not starting from scratch. That doesn't surprise me in this city. You have a lot of vehicles in place. You can look at very quickly short-term and with some work going forward, improve upon those and continue. Any questions I can answer? Thank you.
Thanks, you. Thanks, Bob. Jeff Dorso.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'd like to start off, I worked on the finance team, and I'd like to start off by thanking staff. I don't know if you're aware that your staff participated in many of the meetings and was instrumental in helping get us information so we could look at how we do our job. As people in the private side, we don't have access to a lot of information. We don't have it put together, and the staff and Toby's team did a great job. So I just wanted to call that out. Our group, the finance group, really looked at the question. You're almost going backwards from the conclusion of the entity group now to a discussion of the finance team, which looked at principally what projects have been done in the city and how were those funded, with the idea that, you know, our first task is really to understand what is the scope of what the redevelopment agency has done and what is it doing, so that we could look at how do we replace that if indeed we need to do that. So in that process, we really identified two types of projects. We collected all the projects that the city had done, and we noticed a couple things. One, the projects can be broken down either into what I'd call direct revenue projects. So say you build a parking structure, you can then charge for parking. There's a direct revenue source that comes out of that project, versus you build a city sidewalk. It improves the city. There may be indirect revenue that comes from that by subsequent development, but it's hard to tie a financing source to that project. So we kind of looked at projects in those two groups. We then looked at the amount and what was the kind of rough back of the napkin return on these projects as well. And some of the folks in our group, roughing out some of the numbers, came up with pretty impressive returns on what the city was getting back in terms of these projects. I think the number was 17%, I want to say, but don't hold me to that. But the point of that, which I think is important, is to say that all of the, maybe not all, most of the investments the city has made have actually been good business investments, which I think is positive. And if you're looking for one silver lining, I think one of the things we found is looking forward, if you're replacing this public source of funding with some type of public-private combination, you're going to need to be having that strong return that's been proven over time, and that's certainly going to yield more opportunities for the city going forward in the future. Some of the specific findings our group found in going through that, some of the takeaways, Councilmember Ledesma mentioned some of these at the outset, but we do definitely feel, and Bob mentioned it, if we're looking at the opportunity of doing whatever type of structure that we move forward to, we would urge the council to consider setting aside any funding that we're able to get to seed those opportunities, whether they're development corps or other things that are going to further that community investment. And then I think wrapping up, the last two were that we also believe that the voter-approved revenue opportunities, such as infrastructure financing districts, are viable opportunities, and that with the track record of investment that I alluded to earlier, you're going to have certain other private and public investment opportunities that currently aren't being utilized to help subsidize the redevelopment gap. Any questions?
Johannesson.
Thanks. On the when you're looking at the basically amount we've got invested on a project-by-project basis, and looking at the rate of return, I think one of the comments from the state has been there has been low justification, low material benefit shown for redevelopment agencies, and that's kind of a generalized term. And of course, I think ours have done better than others. But when you're looking at rates of return, is it just the hard rate of return, or do you look at the indirect benefit? I know you threw a 17% number out there, but what were you looking at on return on investment?
So I think there's two things to your question. The first one is, I think in a lot of ways the state is right. There has been a low rate of return, but most of that is because other communities aren't using their money, right? You look at other communities in the county even, and the redevelopment money is sitting in a bank account. And when it's sitting in the bank account, you're not getting a return. So part of West Sacramento's challenge was, and part of our benefit is we actually have used our redevelopment funds. You see it when you go down the streets anywhere, which meant two things. It meant, one, that our buy-in was going to be dramatically higher based on the formula that they had in place. And two, it meant that we actually could have a higher rate of return than what you'd see typically through the state. In terms of the second part of your question, direct versus indirect, you know, I'm not an expert. Councilmember Ledesma might be able to
Yeah,
respond
I think
better on
that was from our colleague at Wells Fargo who came out and was getting an overview of and there was a slide I remember John and Toby put together, but just he was putting together how much dollars the redevelopment agency had put in both direct and indirect projects that led to current values of those properties that we had attained. And again, it was a moment of somebody completely from the outside, had no knowledge of kind of even why he was there for the first 5 minutes, but we invited him. who kind of turned around and said that's a 17% return if the numbers are correct. And I think his characterization was one of just what Jeff articulated was we've invested our dollars very wisely. This commission or this agency and the councils prior to this one have done redevelopment the right way, to validated more of what we've done. And I think his comment was just one of that is one where as a lender, which he is represents, anybody would be impressed to have in their portfolio, to have a return of that amount. So I think it led to a discussion around having that sort of, the group was finding that having that sort of history behind you, that sort of portfolio, makes you the partner, a willing partner with those who may want to do private investment or be a partnership of public-private partnerships, or attract new lenders to kind of come in and fill the gap that redevelopment is exiting. So it just sort of opened up that door.
Yeah. So the final takeaway, I think, for us was that there's positives because we do have a return. We think we will be able to build public-private partnerships that certainly we haven't utilized in the past. And the challenge will be in part, how do you do that for both direct and indirect funded projects? You know, it's a lot easier to get a private partner to come in on something that has a direct revenue stream that they can see how they're going to get their return. It's going to be more challenging with indirect projects.
Right, like a streets or gutters or things like that. It's
Yeah.
probably an infrastructure finance district or
Yeah, and
something
there's
along that line that's probably more appropriate.
Yes, and there's other tools, as I think Bob mentioned. You know,
Right.
one of the things we're identifying is that, you know, RDA is one tool in your toolbox. It may be the wrench or a hammer. It's a pretty big tool, but there's a lot of other tools that can be used to make up the job.
All right, Lon Hatamiat. And Councilmember Ledesma modestly described Mr. Hatamiat as an economist, which, as being one from Berkeley, it is the highest honor. But Mr. Hatamiat is also the former secretary of the Trade and Technology Agency.
Technology,
for the
Trade,
state
and
of
Commerce
California.
Agency.
Technology,
I'll
Trade,
deal with that real
I
briefly.
always miss
but
one of them. Technology, Trade, and Commerce Agency for the state of California, along with a lot of distinguished service in the federal government as well. So we're very, very fortunate.
And Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you very much for allowing me to be here today. I want to just draw some general observations based upon my perspective as an economist and as the former Secretary of Technology, Trade, and Commerce for the state of California, where I headed up economic development programs for this great state. One of the things, first of all, I want to echo the comments of my colleagues so far. I believe you have, quite a bit of tools available to you without a redevelopment agency. And I think you really need to continue to focus on the ability to remain proactive as a city, and again, ahead of other communities. I think as Councilmember Ledesma has mentioned, West Sacramento, I think, is one of the few cities in the state that even considered the possibility of no redevelopment. I think most other communities were looking about opting in and didn't even consider what would happen if redevelopment agencies didn't exist. And so I do, secondly, want to commend you for taking the opportunity to take a look at what options there were. And I think, we put together some good recommendations. Again, a great group of folks that we had the ability to draw from a lot of different experiences. The third issue I'd like to address is really the importance of the diligence and focus for the city as you move forward into this year without redevelopment and looking at the options that are at hand. And the reason I raise this issue as an economist, I don't yet see the light at the end of the tunnel for a quick rebound in our economy. So what's going to happen across the river is a continued pressures in terms of the state budget. They'll be continually looking at other sources of funding. And so I think that this proactivity of West Sacramento in this effort will afford you well in ensuring that you can move forward without having to really be endangered by continued attacks. I also want to forewarn, let's not, and I think Councilmember Ledesma said this rightly, don't rely upon what potentially could happen legislatively. about the future of redevelopment. I think that with the options we've provided, you'll have an opportunity to look at alternatives that will work for West Sacramento and work well for you into the future. So I just wanted to make those general observations, again, from my prior experience, but also my experience as an economist today, and thank you for your kind comments. I'd be glad to answer any questions, just generally.
Well, thanks so much.
Great, thank you very much.
Appreciate it. And Grant Deary. And I believe Mr. Ledesma gave no introduction. He just said, and then there was Grant Deary, and then there was someone else. So,
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of this West Sac City Council. It's my pleasure to come up and represent the Competitive Edge Committee as part of the advisory team. I got to tell you, it was an educational process for me, being that I'm in the beverage industry and not enthralled into the nuances of redevelopment, and it was an enlightening experience. Also representing as the outgoing chair of the West Sac Chamber, so I have a wider business perspective from a membership involvement. We were tasked with basically doing an array analysis of funding mechanisms as it relates to methodologies of like affordable housing, public infrastructure, and development funding on one end. The other was analyzing how other cities and in other states, in some instances, methodologies on funding and facilitating economic development and providing the incentives for economic development. In the public infrastructure standpoint, we looked at areas of fee reduction and waivers, zoning, or development incentives. Public infrastructure would be exaction, impact B, comparative analysis, and then, of course, development funding was a lot of bond, California Infrastructure State Revolving Fund programs, 501c3 revenue bond programs, industrial development and revenue bond programs. Some of the highlights on the economic development area that we thought are areas of opportunity, and quite frankly, some of this is purely a validation, I think, of and some of the comments were made earlier, of the proactive nature, collaborative culture of the West Sac, the city of West Sacramento, and the business community. It was a business creation, retention, and assistance programs. We identified that as possibly a big opportunity for the city of West Sacramento. And in fact, in Diane Richards' report, the Business Resource Center, that's probably right in alignment with this type of program. So it's an ongoing thing, I think. And in an ideal collaboration with the West Sacramento Chamber of Commerce. So we see that as a big opportunity. And also it was identified that there's a much more comprehensive models in cities like Union City and San Jose that are kind of further along in this area that might be worthy of examination. Also, our Economic Development Public Affairs Forum we hold every month. This again is a great opportunity to provide that interchange and that dialogue and collaboration with the forum that we help conduct as part of the City of West Sacramento Chamber. So the other obvious ones are enterprise zones. Our company, NorCal Beverage, has been a big beneficiary of that program in terms of job stimulus and bringing local folks here in the city jobs, being that we're based here in West Sacramento. Foreign trade zones, obviously in Port of West Sacramento, very applicable in that area as well. Partnership for business development, West Sacramento has done that, again, more of a validation. Hiring and training programs. We also looked at other cities outside of California, Portland, Oregon, which is tax increment financings primarily. Phoenix, Arizona, Community Development Investment Corporation, a community kind of a stimulus fund development financing through the U.S. Treasury, as an example, awarded Phoenix $170 million in tax credit to individual investors that develop within the community, provide businesses and employment programs. Expand, it was another one. Loan assistance collateral support to businesses with a multi-bank consortium approach. Kind of a very innovative program that we think, obviously, we're recommending further research analysis for the city of West Sacramento to consider going forward. And then, of course, Washington State, which is focused, analogous to the non-redevelopment environment of public, nonprofit, and private business economic development centers working in coordination with one another. Again, public-private partnerships. I kind of took a page out of Dr. Robert Fountain's presentation, the third door, basically looking forward. We see more of a capitalistic and equity-driven type of model going forward, which is going to be a lot more collaboration with the private sector and the public sector to replace the RDA funding that was in place. Basically, funding, our findings and takeaways are somewhat self-evident. I think it's already been mentioned. West Sacramento was the only city, I think, looking at this in opting in or opting out from a collaborative private sector, public sector approach, which was absolutely refreshing, and it speaks volumes to the collaborative nature of this city. Secondly, the process has strengthened, we think, relationships with the local partners, including SACTO, obviously the West Sacramento Chamber of Commerce, and organizations such as SARTA. The advisory team study has placed the city of West Sacramento far ahead of the curve on best practices moving forward in the post-redevelopment world, and I think we're way ahead of the curve at this point by engaging an advisory committee such as the one we've done. And obviously, West Sacramento continues to have a reputation for being a solid partner. And that's, again, another thing I think that was somewhat self-evident in going through this process. Further, we recognize some core competencies. I think it's been stated earlier, the culture and the experience in this room will continue to result in successful economic development and community investment outcomes, regardless of what combination of incentives or partnerships are utilized or leveraged. And then finally, West Sacramento is basically beneficially situated economically and geographically for continued and sustained economic growth going forward for the residents of this city of West Sacramento. And that concludes my remarks, and I want to thank Council Member Chris Ledesma for leading this project. It was very rewarding and informative, and I think putting the city on a path for success going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Deary. Further, Mr. Ledesma? That's everyone.
Yeah, thanks to all the committee members who came out tonight and spoke. I did want to reemphasize that we will be working on a final report. There was a ton of analysis that was done, listing of resources that we're basically going to hand over to Aaron. And I think he came to one meeting and left, couldn't wait to get his hands on some of the findings we had. But I think one of the side benefits of this was having the business community and the community at large, again, starting that partnership, because I think one of our general findings was just we're going to deliberate how we're going to go about this. We have a lot of work to do in terms of the dissolution, but when you have a community already started thinking about moving ahead, that's probably half the battle for us. And I don't think any of this group, and I don't want to speak for all of you because I know you have other commitments, but would be willing to engage more. We're going to have to do more with less in our city staff. And the thing that was so great about working with this group is I would call them and they'd answer the phone, return the phone calls right away, offer their expertise, bring in new members, find new resources. And so I think that's a real tribute to an asset that us as a council can leverage going forward. And certainly the city staff can, all the byproducts of that. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity, and thank you for putting together the task force, and thanks to task force members again. Again, we're available for questions, and we'll be working continually through the end of the month.
All right, Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, first I'd like to thank Councilmember Ledesma for heading up this group. I found it very informative. Particularly the toolbox that looks like we've got available to us. I had the opportunity to be a participant in a telephone conference regarding the redevelopment lawsuit, and this was sponsored by the League of California Cities. It was with Director Chris McKenzie and CRA Executive Director Jim Kennedy. And I just wanted to let the council know, basically what's happening from the league is they're going along two tracks. One is they're looking at legislation to potentially postpone the dissolution date of February 1st, And it looks like that's SB 654 with Padilla who has that carried. And they're requesting basically a concerted lobbying effort. And they actually have talking points that they would like to, the idea is to postpone this to sometime in April 15th or so, to allow them to sort out technical fixes to what's happening now. And that seems to be the plan A. Plan B is I think we're way ahead of that now with the work that Councilmember Ledesma has done, because it's really going to be, what happens if the dissolution does occur, and it looks like it will occur, and it probably won't be postponed from the indications. I had the opportunity to talk to Dan Carriage, who's I think a legislative director at the League of Cities, and the specific conversation was, what about Plan B, and who at the League of Cities is really talking about Plan B? And my impression is the work that you've done is more than they're doing right now, which is really great. It really does put us ahead, really ahead of the curve. It looks like what they're doing is they're not really going to talk about Plan B, because their total effort is now to try and get this dissolution dates postponed, because their feeling is that there are all these other options. Some of these are going to take a while to get going. For example, an infrastructure finance district, it's not going to happen overnight. I'm really glad to see there's a number of things that we've got in our toolbox that we can do right now, which is really comforting, because I wouldn't want to be in a position to say, okay, we've got this alternative, it'll take 2 years to get going, and we're basically stalled for 2 years. So I think what you've done and what the team has done is really right on track of what we're trying to do. But I think it would be worthwhile for us to at least make the effort to try to see if we get this date postponed, because they're looking at technical fixes, and it's more to maybe include more precise criteria for redevelopment projects, included the affordable housing, the jobs, the measurable economic effect, and things of that nature. They're not going to be able to do that if the dissolution date's February 1st. So they think if they can postpone it to April 15th, they'll have enough time for their people to get together, put it into this Padilla bill, and possibly something will come out of it. So.
Just on that point, I think you could. I think you could make a case that we actually might not be particularly advantaged by a delay. There's this period right now where we are the only chickens that still have our heads on. Everyone else is running around crazy. They don't know, what does this law say? What are we supposed to do? Hold on, shut everything down. Developers don't come to it. We cannot deal with you. We don't know who the agency's going to be. We don't know what's going to happen with this property. We don't know what's going on. We do. We were prepared for this date anyway, because the wheels had been turning in preparation for an opt-in. Now, there's a lot of things that are not clear, certainly, but it might be to our advantage to start doing them, and then setting especially since the president of the Senate is our new state senator, to start doing them, and then try to get them codified, as opposed to letting everybody get another time to catch up to what we've done. So so I'm not sure. I'm not opposing what they're proposing to do, but I'm not sure it's as important for us to extend that time frame, because there's this period where we have a little bit of competitive advantage in that we have a sense of direction, and a lot of the mechanics we've already, and the legal issues and the property inventories and all that stuff we've already done. So if they ask us for a support letter, I'm all for it, but I'm not sure I'd want to put much of our capital into that at this stage. I don't. Mr. Christoph.
Just to comment on some of that too, and I do believe that there are some legislators that would like to try to put something together. They'd like to try to delay something, and they would like to try to put some kind of a quote-unquote kind of redevelopment agency together. The governor doesn't want to do that. And unless the governor is going to do that, then, you might as well, what we've done is we've done the right thing. We've, tried to put together as many programs as we possibly can. We've tried to look at different alternatives. Quite frankly, I think the best alternative that we have if we can get its financial house in order, and that is our port. But I do believe we need to do some work to get the comfort level of the lending community. I think we need their comfort level raised so that they would lend money to the port, or the port can in turn ask for bonds or whatever they may be, some other funding mechanism. But we have to make sure that we have a way to repay those. And we have to make sure that, I mean, we have some debt now. We've got to try to get rid of that debt. And I think that we are doing some good things. We've got a groundbreaking next month on another business. And if we can pull a couple more businesses together and we can utilize the monies that are generated from those businesses, they won't be tax increment anymore. But if we can use those funds to pay down the debt, at least the comfort level will be raised by the lending community so that we can in turn do some economic development. Because the port has, in matter of fact, the agency didn't have, but the port has economic development under its umbrella. And that's a big thing, that's a good thing. So I'm pretty excited about, seeing if there is a way to have the port be really one of those engines. Because I think the infrastructure bank is going to take some time, and then there are some other funding mechanisms that take a vote of the people, and I'm really not sure the public is all that enthused with assessing themselves so that they can have some further development. I think that's going to be a tough sell for the council, but I think it's something we need to think through, work through. We need to poll and make sure that we've got, good information. But I just don't think, unless the governor is going to step up, I don't think, I think everything is gonna be delayed.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if you break down this issue into its components, the non-tax increment powers and authorities of the agency, I think both the staff work and the team independently have come to the same conclusion, which is there's the Port District can handle a good chunk of that, and there's a variety of other mechanisms and entities and ways to deal with that question of the various non-tax increment powers that the agency has had. And the tax increment piece is the one area we don't have a solution to, although Aaron's telling us to be optimistic that when he comes back in March, he's going to have a community investment strategy that will deal with that. But no one in the legislature seriously has a strategy for dealing with that either, right? I mean, I think many of us have heard, there's an interest in having an SB 375 focused son of redevelopment that would be focused around urban development that supports the sustainability plans and all of that. That challenges the governor, as you say, has already spent all of the money. It's already in the budget. And in fact, more is in the budget from redevelopment than is actually available, because the governor didn't really have an effective way to count up all the enforceable obligations, because none of us have reported those in yet. So there's less money out there. So it's their fiscal pressure now, the whole equation has changed. And so it's going to be extraordinarily difficult, and very few people are even pretending that they have any hope of being able to crack the tax increment nut, which is the one area that we've not yet come up with a distinctive solution. So that seems like that area is, legislatively probably not very opportune. The Port District piece we could, and I think one of our near-term tasks ought to be, while the legislature wants to be helpful, are there things that we could fine-tune at the Port District? And frankly, there might be some tax increment related pieces that, if narrowly, properly construed, that could work there. That we ought to at least consider proposing. And so thinking about if we were to ask one of our legislators, current or new, to sponsor a Port District bill, and potentially in cooperation with the other major ports. The other ports, the major ports in California, as a potential way to sort of bring back some components without taking on the entire fiscal impact for the whole state. It seems like a good a good near-term task. Then there's this capital financing question, right? So the specific dollars aside, how do we save money? How do we have money for doing capital projects? Because redevelopment's been in addition to our impact fees, has been one of the most significant ways in which we've been able to essentially say of property tax revenue coming in, some of it is being set aside to build stuff and stuff that costs lots of money, right? So right, in the absence of that, we would have to have some way to save for it. And although that's easy to say, it's extremely difficult to do when when we have current needs that are right in front of our face every May and June during budget season. But you think, okay, if we ever were to build a Broadway bridge, if we want to complete the streetcar project, if we need to do these big infrastructure projects, it's not as though with the 2-year time frame, we could come up with enough money locally. That's the sort of thing you just have to constantly be setting aside money for. Redevelopment did that. It was basically a Christmas club as a way to finance capital outlay. This money's just off the top, and you can't spend it on operations for the most part, except for some economic development work. So that we have to solve. And I know the teams, spend a fair amount of time on that, and Aaron's the internal committee is doing the same thing. But we need, to me, that's one of the issues that remains for how we figure out how to do that systematically. This council, for the last 2 decades, has been pretty good at the discipline to be able to do that. But we've had redevelopment as a mechanism to make it easy for us to do that, and we don't have that anymore. The other next component, I think, which is the least tangible one, which is the cultural one, is because of the way the redevelopment works, it's put the economic impacts of specific projects front and center for us. So when we look at things like the relocation of the rail spur in what is now the Bridge District, when our staff came in to brief us on it in closed session and discover here's the impacts, right up front was, and here's the impact to our community's assets because of the money that we will get because of the tax increment from redevelopment. And so it causes, both for us and for our staff team, a clear internalizing of the development economics into the decisions that we're making. And we still get that because we get property tax revenues from development projects still, but it's much more diffuse because now we're only getting this much of it instead of this much of it. And so the direct relationship between our policy and our policy decisions and actions and the economic outcomes is more tenuous than it was before. And so I think that's not like a crisis, but we need to be aware of it from a leadership and management perspective. That it's still just as important for the community. It still matters. I mean, maybe that dollar is going to go to the mosquito district and not to us, or to the schools or something else. But it's still important, and for the jobs that are being created, those sort of things we have to be more affirmative in internalizing into the work that we're doing within the city. So I think those are the less tangible things, but they're important because although it's absolutely right that we have been. We've been very successful and we have a good reputation and all of that. We've become extremely adept, better than most at using the tools that we've had. But somebody just took away our hammer, and so now we're left with that little tiny screwdriver that's really only good for consumer electronics, and we've got to figure out now how are we going to be the best at this, and it is not just I think the challenge, I laid out to the team at the beginning was it's not natural. We're just not natural. It's not natural that we're super competent and pragmatic and all that. Although we tell ourselves that. I mean, we've worked at that, and 25 years of city councils and staff and community partners and business leaders have developed that culture with the tools that we have. And if we're not conscious about doing that into the future with this if we're replacing redevelopment with 27 new strategies, if we're not conscious about inculcating that same culture and set of values in the work that we're doing, we won't just naturally win. It's not in the water. We've spent plenty of time in the past not winning. So I think that we have the luxury of thinking about these issues because the staff and the team have really done an excellent job of scoping out and bringing a lot of clarity to the specifics. So for me, the Port District is one of them. Looking at potential legislation there, I would like, as we're thinking about the community investment internal team that's bringing this under the schedule that Aaron did, that we need to plan time in our schedule, and we can talk about this at our strategic planning retreat, for thinking about the November election, and whether we want to do an infrastructure financing district, or, we have talked previously, and I know that the team did as well, should we have an advisory measure about exactly the question that the team raised, which is you should reserve the money that would have been redevelopment before, you should reserve that for capital projects, community investment, and economic development. We could declare that right now, but it won't mean anything 4 years from now if the council just does that now. And so, one option is, should we ask the voters for their advisory opinion about it? I don't know what the answer is to that, but we can't, that takes time for us to do that. So if it's, put something on the November ballot, we have to do it in August, and that means we have to start talking about it in April. I mean, there's a process for that. And so all I'm suggesting is that staff needs to start agendizing that conversation so that we're able to make the right judgments, because Mr. Kristoff raises the right concerns. Voters may not have the appetite for it, but we need to at least think about it, and not get to a point in July where, oh shoot, we should have been prepared to put something on the ballot. We know now far enough in advance that we could do that. And maybe it's both. Maybe it's a capital reserve advisory measure and an IFD or something else. I don't know, but we need to be prepared to move in that direction. The other thing I would mention is we've begun the work of the Successor agency, figuring out how to proceed. I think Friday would be the deadline if we were to change our mind and decide we don't want to be the Successor agency. If anyone on the council thinks that we should let the county be the Successor agency, or the school district, you should speak up now, because Friday's the deadline for changing our mind. But assuming that we do, we've been working to assemble the oversight board that's required under the statute, so that they could get together early and start getting up to speed. So they won't have to take any formal actions necessarily until May, but there's absolutely no reason why they can't be fully briefed and start to really get into these issues. One of the things that's mentioned in the staff report, but that I want to highlight about that process, and Charlene mentioned it to me earlier this week, is that in just 4 years from now, even that advisory board goes away and is subsumed in a countywide advisory board, on which we don't have any guarantee of being represented at all. And given that the statute also says the disposition of property is supposed to be done expeditiously, but also to maximize value, which are that's not exactly clear how those are reconciled. We're going to have continuing issues around that whole issue of asset disposition, but we are working to try to assemble the advisory board with the local agency partners that have appointments to make, so that the board can be as knowledgeable as possible about the issues in the context as we proceed. And the other jurisdictions and the other redevelopment agencies in the county have not made up their minds yet, but if they don't, the statute does allow us, if for example, if the city of Woodland were to decide we don't want to be the successor agency, and although that might sound silly, the city of Los Angeles voted earlier today to not be the successor agency for the Los Angeles Redevelopment Agency. So if the city of Woodland or Davis or Winters were to do that, the statute actually does authorize us directly, even without asking. We can become the successor agency for any of the redevelopment agencies in the county. The administrative costs of doing so are covered by those redevelopment agencies' sources of revenue, and obviously the more than we would do, the potential for economies of scale would be enhanced, and also the potential for when they all have to be rolled up into one, the oversight boards all have to be rolled up into one in 2016, we might be in a better position if we were administering all of them. So we don't need to, obviously resolve that tonight, because the other jurisdictions haven't figured out what they're doing, but there's this other wrinkle that is out there on the horizon that we ought to be thinking about as well.
Just a quick comment. I too would really like to thank the committee for the work that they've done. It's a monumental task. There's been a lot of thinking outside the box, and quite frankly, I really appreciate that. I don't know if we have all the answers, but at least I think that this is going to give me, something to work off of. And I truly appreciate all the work that Chris and the committee has done. Just want to thank them for that.
Mayor Pro Tem Villegas?
Yeah, just real briefly, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also wanted to thank the committee, thank Mr. Ledesma for all the work. I know it's, we're all busy, but stepping up to take the time to do this is quite important. I will say, though, that I think it's important, and I think you mentioned it earlier, I think it's important, critically important, that we remind ourselves to remain focused on how we best use these very precious dollars, because by reinvesting them back into an economic development product, that means they're not going to get to go somewhere else. And so I would encourage the committee to be very focused on trying to find a way to remain disciplined, because as the mayor said earlier, that's been in large part why we've been successful, is that we've remained disciplined. And I'm worried that as we go down this path, we're not focused on precisely what would be the best result of our reinvestment, because we've had requests to use the funds in ways that would not clearly have not led us to the 17% or whatever the number is, or isn't, whatever. But I think it's important that we remain extremely disciplined and very focused, because currently nearly 40%, 47% of our cities in the redevelopment, and whether it ends up in this new structure, this new format, remains to be seen. But I also think we need to be cognizant of the fact that different districts or different areas within our city might have different needs, and so we might need to break things down depending on what those needs are as we move forward, not necessarily think of the entire city needing all the same sort of investment. So otherwise, thank you very much.
I was just going to, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to echo something you said earlier, which was about the need for us to start taking some of the information we've gathered, certainly the work that the staff has put together, and our own thoughts, and start probably agendizing them soon. And I would also add on to that, that without the redevelopment agency there, and with the legislature probably not getting any answers on any new program, or not being able to go anywhere, we should probably be prepared continue to be very nimble, very flexible about what possibilities are out there. I mean, we may put 3 or 4 things out there, actions to solidify our assets, to get the oversight committee up to speed, to have an advisory vote on on the revenue, on bringing assets back, on seeding the port. All these might be actionable things for the next 3 to 6 months, but then things may change again, and we have to be prepared to always be evaluating. I'm glad we've set up the structure of our organization, Toby, the way we have. So Aaron's focused like a laser beam. He's been, the times we've interacted and seen at the meetings, it's been a terrific setup, and I know the rest of the staff, like Charlene and John, they've been very helpful in this process. But as a council, we need to be prepared to make, as you put, short-term issues, and probably evaluate those every 6, 9, 12 months, because it's not going to be a stable environment. Even though the economy shows signs of some growth, it's not going to affect our government for some time, and we still have very real needs. And I think we just need to prepare to do that. We're not going to come up with an answer at the end of our strategic planning time, and it's not going to be set. It's going to be something we'll have to evaluate every 6 months. So again, I just wanted to echo some of that.
Yeah, and we've hit the inflection point. The agency is going to go out of business, whether it's February 1st or some later date. And we have been, the whole council and the staff and all of our partners have been very vocal. And it's time for us to change our own narrative, right? So we've described very vocally and loudly and dramatically for the public, for our own residents and for policymakers, that there would be no Rayleigh Field without redevelopment. There would be no West Capitol Avenue revitalization. There would be no Southport. There would be no Bridge District. But now I think we need, it's clear, having talked to a couple of reporters, we need to remind people those are not going away. We don't have to give them back. The Bridge District is on track. I mean, the agreements that we've made in the Bridge District and the work that's occurred, putting all those agreements together and starting the projects and dealing with the property issues over the last year, we're on track on those projects. The challenge is that the next Bridge District, we don't know how. We don't know how to do that project. We don't know how to do the next West Capitol Avenue yet. Those are what we're working on, but the projects that we have underway are not in jeopardy. We still have a lot to do with the projects that we have. We've said a lot about the team and a little bit about the stuff. I just want, when we started I think Aaron, Charlene, and John they're all on their third job for us just in the last 14 months, maybe 18 months. I mean, a lot of disruption and moving around has been occurring in our own operation, and the quality of the work that both the staff's been doing directly for us and on their own, in their own time with Toby, with the team as well, has been stellar in terms of the quality of what's been done. Both the recognition of the crisis dimension of so many of these pieces. Okay, now we got to figure out what all the properties are. We got to put all these, covenants on them. Okay, now we have to do, this on the bonds or whatever. But also doing that in a way that was not running around like the sky was falling. I mean, in some respects it was, but there was it's been very extraordinarily well managed, very professional, very calm, and yet very focused and really oriented around the most important things to get done and doing them well and getting it all accomplished. And so I both for the work tonight, but really over this entire period since the governor's proposal came out, I want to salute our own staff team and management for how it's been handled. It's real, and especially as you watch. So I've watched just today talking to the mayor of LA about how nuts that city of 4 million is in their budget and staff of thousands. How they have, they're clueless compared to the 2 or 3 or 4 people at any one moment that are working on these issues. For us, it's really extraordinary, and it's a real testament to the quality and the commitment of the people that are working for this community.
One of the things, Aaron, I'd like you to take a look at, or maybe even Charlene, and that is our need for the affordable housing policy citywide, because there's been a 20% set aside that has done, and that's gonna, I mean, it's done, but I mean, we still have that. But that affordable housing policy, I think really needs we need to take a look at it, because there may be some issues within the triangle itself. And so I just, that'll be one of the areas that I want to ask some questions about at a future time. I mean, I think what we're doing tonight, as far as the housing policy goes, I think is appropriate. I think that's fine. But moving forward, I have some issues.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, Mr. Christoph's had issues with the underlying policy for a long time, and I
got an opening.
And I was and I have been a big supporter of it, but I think it's entirely appropriate that we revisit it. I mean, not that I still don't believe in the policy and what we're trying to accomplish in terms of economic diversity and housing for every stage of life. Those are still core values. But that our citywide policy was built on the foundation of the project area, mandates under state law, and also on the notion that we would have the low and moderate income funds to be able to do that. And so it's for me, I'm not ready to throw it away, but I mean, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, can we still deliver on this? And if so, how are we going to accomplish that? So it's not, again, you're right. It's not something that has to come back next month, but it needs to be on our, and maybe we'll talk about this in our retreat, but it needs to be on our midterm punch list of how exactly are we going to deal with this affordable housing question. It's also going to come up in the legislature, because it's clear that at least within the Democratic caucus, the main interest is in reviving redevelopment for the purpose of dealing with affordable housing, which I'm totally opposed to. The idea that you would just figure out a way to build housing without dealing with the brownfield next door, or the sidewalk, or the elementary school that should be built a block away. I mean, without dealing with the neighborhood in which you're asking folks to move into, it's a false promise. And so that's going to be it. But how affordable housing relates to redevelopment more generally is definitely going to be, and we're going to have to insist that it be a broader policy question for the state too. All right. So the staff is recommending a formal motion for us to elect to retain the housing assets.
I would move staff's recommendation to retain the housing assets.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Villegas and seconded by Mr. Christoph. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. So thanks again, staff, and thanks again to Mr. Ledesma and to the team. We know the work's not quite done, but it's been extraordinarily valuable, and your work's been tremendously valued. Thank you very, very much. All right, that brings us to council calendar. No, we gotta go back.
Seven.
to- Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Collis is back there glaring at me. Item 7 is a workshop on State of California Neighborhood Stabilization Program funding.
2-minute report.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
It is.
I don't know if they say no.
Good evening. We're here this evening to request council direction regarding a possible application for additional neighborhood stabilization funding. This program is known as NSP. 2 years ago, the city received $1 million in NSP1 funds from the state of California, and it was dedicated to the purchase and rehab of vacant and foreclosed homes in older neighborhoods of West Sacramento. Did you have the, okay. To date, 10 homes have been rehabbed and resold to first-time homebuyers. An 11th home is in process, and we expect to have enough money to complete at least one more home, possibly 2. In December, the state announced that the city is eligible to apply for another $2.6 million from a new allocation of funding known as NSP3. In addition, the state tells us that there may be some unused funds returned by other jurisdictions in the near future, and the city has the option of applying for any additional funding that may become available. NSP3 is similar to NSP1 with the following exceptions. NSP1 was used for homeownership units, but the state has prioritized single-family rental units for NSP3. NSP1 home buyers could have higher income limits. NSP3 is limited to low and very low income households. At least 50% of NSP3 funding has to be spent by this coming December, and we're limited to a smaller target area, so we're going to have to dedicate some resources to make that happen. And that's basically because HCD, there was some delay in their submittal of the NOFA. Is that thing working, Chris? Oh, yeah, it was set to time, it was timed, so, okay. Do I need to click on it? Okay. At the January 9th meeting, the Housing Advisory Commission recommended that an application be submitted for the full $2.6 million and that the city request any additional funding that may become available. NSP, if we did take the additional money, there might be some concern with requiring additional staffing to manage that program. But NSP does provide sufficient grant admin fees to cover our staff time. So basically, we're asking the council to give us direction on 4 things so that we could submit an application by the January 27th due date. 1 is, should we submit an application? 2 is for how much? 3, should we request additional funding? And 4, should we use the state priority for affordable rental, or should we push the state to allow us to continue to do some homeownership units? Just so you'll see, this was our NSP target area for NSP1. So although most of the units that we did were in central Brighton Broderick, so and in the little area where Lilac Lane and Manzanita meet. I think we did 3 homes on that in that block or 2. The NSP target area for NSP3, the state has limited it to a very small area. It's going to be difficult for us to get a lot of funds spent quickly, and so we also are trying to encourage the state to expand that, and they are open to that, but we're going to have to provide justification for that. That concludes my presentation.
So it's not 95605, it's just this subpart of 95605?
We were originally told it was all of Brighton Broderick. I found out yesterday that it's this small area. Originally, they said Brighton Broderick neighborhoods where you did the original homes. So now they're saying HUD came back and said it needs to be a smaller area, and this is what we have. There are homes available. We've looked online.
Louise?
Yes.
You talked about you need resources. What kind of resources? How much money are you talking about?
Resources would be staff time.
Okay, staff.
But there are admin fees with the grant. We do not have to provide any matching funds for the grant. So we would have to dedicate more staff time than we have available right now in housing, but there are grant fees that could cover those staff positions.
Okay.
Mr. Johannesson?
Eloise, I can, on the acquisition and rehabilitation of these properties, who's actually doing that, physically doing the work?
NSP1, and NSP1, we contracted originally with Mercy Housing, who would then go out to bid for local contractors. We had a preference for local contractors written into their contract. They stopped doing single-family rehab, and it's now, their contract was assumed by Sacramento Neighbor Works. So that's who's doing NSP1. With NSP3, if we were to have more money and have to do more homes more quickly, we would probably do a different model than that. But a number of nonprofits have talked to us about being interested.
Have you talked to Habitat for Humanities?
Yes, we've spoken to Habitat.
Yeah, one of the issues, and I don't really know, I don't know if you know the answer, but a concern is the concentration of rentals versus home ownership. So in terms of, I mean, from my point, the direction would be to look at housing, ownership rather than rentals. But particularly in these areas, is there becoming to be an over-concentration of rentals? Because I think what happens is that really is not productive to good neighborhood development. You should encourage home ownership. I'm a little bit worried that we're maybe focusing too much on rentals. I don't know if you know what the percentages of home ownership in that.
Well, I've done some looking. There's some information from the 2010 census available now. Not everything is online yet. And Brighton, Broderick, and the Washington areas were 65% owner-occupied in the 2000 census and 45% owner-occupied in the 2010 census. So that's a drop of 20%. And so maybe not over a 10-year period, not all of that is a result of the foreclosure crisis, but probably a good percentage of it.
Yeah, I mean, to me,
So-
that is a problem because, you potentially could have absentee landlords that don't really have any community connection. You have people moving in and out, even though single-family residents, people tend to stay longer. You still have rental where you have people coming in and out more than people that live there for a generation. So, I mean, it seems like it's becoming more of a problem, and we probably should look at doing something to maybe turn the tide more toward home ownership as opposed to just creating more rentals in that area.
Well, our home ownership program with NSP1 was very successful.
Yeah.
We didn't have trouble selling the homes. Home buyers are going to have to have lower income limits, which means they're going to have more difficulty getting a mortgage in this environment. So it's a little more tricky, but we still feel like it's workable. However, 25% of the funds have to go to the lower income, very low income, which really is almost impossible for those folks to buy a home at this point. So, our recommendation would be to do the very low income unit, so we'll have some rental and fulfill the state's priority that way, and 75% of the funds going for home ownership if the council should instruct us to submit this application.
Yeah, I think on the the very low income, the key would be to a better disbursement. We've talked about that a number of occasions, to not have a concentration of low income in one particular area. Try and see if we can disperse that around the community in different forms, would be the best alternative. But thank you.
Well, I'm for it. I mean, all the things that you've said are problems with the way the program works, but this isn't mainly an affordable housing program. This program is intended to deal with the fact that we and other communities have vacant, dilapidated properties that aren't being maintained because they've been foreclosed on, and the existence of them is what is dragging down neighborhoods, creating pockets and opportunities for crime and for blight, and affecting everyone else's property values and lives. And that's really the purpose of this program. It's not just another affordable housing subsidy. The idea is get people into these homes, fix them up, and get people into them so that they can be, not be drags on the neighborhood anymore. And so from that perspective, I think if we can get to up to $2.6 million to do that, even in this one, even in Elkhorn Village and the adjacent areas of Broderick, it's worth doing. I mean, I agree with you. I don't think. I mean, one of the reasons we're in this problem, we've got this crisis, is that we were pushing folks who could not afford home ownership into home ownership, and so let's not repeat that and insist that a family of three making $34,000 a year, that they must buy a home. I mean, that may not be the best financial, even if they could get the financing, which you're right, they can't. It may not be the best financial option for them. Rental in this market might be the best way. So I think the way that you've identified all the right things that are not ideal about this program, and the ways that you're proposing to address them seem reasonable to me, for the objective of trying to make sure that we get rid of, that we deal with the pockets of dilapidated homes that are plaguing some of our neighborhoods in the community. And this is a start, and it's $2.6 million, so I'm for it.
Yep.
Mayor Pro Tem Villegas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would also encourage you to, it sounds like you already talked to the YOLO Habitat for Humanity. I know they're interested in doing some projects. In fact, they're going to be doing some work this Saturday. So I know they I don't know if it strengthens your application or not, but certainly that's one to consider. And then also the Northern California Construction Training, the pre-apprenticeship program has a lot of folks in our community that are already in it, already involved in it, and it certainly has led to good jobs in the future for them. So if it fits within the model that you're exploring, I don't know yet, but if it does, certainly worth considering using them as part of the project if it works.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that, because another thing there's another state priority this time that the rehab is primarily to be done by local contractors. So they kind of don't want volunteer labor. But we talked to Habitat, they are able to just go in and rehab homes too. So rather than, so they can do something other than their traditional all volunteer labor thing. NCCT, I would have to check with them to see if they would be able to fulfill that. So I haven't spoken to them recently. We did talk to them originally within SB1. I haven't spoken to them since then, though. But we've spoken to Habitat. We've spoken to the Housing Development Corporation. We've spoken to the Housing Authority, not recently, but within SB1. So a number of organizations. There's no lack of organizations interested in helping us spend the money.
Is it the housing staff that determines which homes would be purchased and rehabilitated, or what's the
And in
process
SB1, our contractor went out and was looking for the homes, and then if they found one they were interested in, they would write up a proposal, give us a cost breakdown of what the estimated rehab cost, the estimated resale price, so we could see what we were looking at, and then staff may either approved or disapproved that purchase.
So it's driven primarily by the contractor then? I mean, is it at least initially driven by the contractor, or is there input initially from staff or from folks in the community or the police department in terms of problem areas, or as the mayor alluded to, areas that cause additional problems in a neighborhood?
With NSP 1, we primarily were looking for homes that we could sell quickly and get the program income back so we could roll it into another home. So we were looking for homes that weren't in really bad shape, that needed rehab. Most of our rehabs were $50,000 to $60,000. We didn't want to do anything that had really major issues because it would have taken a long time. Our money would have been sitting there a long time. The home would be vacant longer. We wanted to get in there, rehab it, get a family in. That was our objective. We could relook at that for NSP3. This is going to be this program's going, this funding, although it's supposedly the same money, basically has a different outlook. It's targeted more towards what you were talking about as far as focusing on a very small neighborhood and making a big impact on that neighborhood. So we will have to look at those sort of things for NSP3.
Mr. Kristoff.
Yeah, Louise, no, I support this. I think this is a way to get some homes that are blighted and fixed up and make them look good. But I agree with Mr. Johannesson in some respects that home ownership is absolutely critical. And so if we can put the vast majority of those homes, like we'll say we did 10, I mean, I understand the low income component of that, and that'll always probably be in rental and, in reality. But at the same time, the others, I would certainly like to see if we could get into home ownership. Because when somebody owns that home, there's a certain amount of prestige and pride and all the other kinds of things that go along with it that make for a better neighborhood.
All right, we do have one request to speak on this item. Mr. Lowell?
Let's see, we are on item 7, are we not?
Yes.
I was just wondering, William Lowell for the record. I was just wondering if these are being considered for folks that have to rely on wheelchairs and had other difficulties getting around. Are they being made accessible for those folks? Because I see them all the time that have a hard time getting around, and so to make them eligible, I don't know what the guidelines are, but I would certainly invite somebody from this department to attend our neuropathy meeting over at the library from 12:30 to 2:30 tomorrow, although our main guest is going to be a neurologist doctor, I believe. But this is the kind of thing we are interested in. And so again, it's at the library from 12:30 to 2:30 tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lowell. All right, that's our only request for public comment. Ms. Cost, any further information based on the public testimony?
I wasn't sure from the council's comments whether you're interested in going for.
No, I'm sorry, the public comments, if you have any
okay.
additional.
Yes, I'm sorry. Is there a specific question you needed answered? All our projects have to come under all city codes, which includes ADA.
Mr. Johannesson?
Please, maybe just to follow up his question, I don't know how quickly these things, when you actually do a rehabilitation turnaround, when the buyer comes into play, I mean, it looks like basically you have the house done, it's ready to go, for sale sign comes up and that's done. But if you have someone, for example, with disabilities that wants to move in, is there any mechanism to maybe put ramps or something in there, or is that strictly for the home buyer to do once they come in?
Usually what happens is when the rehab gets far enough along that they start marketing it before it's done, so that the buyer could come in and choose their color of carpet, their color of paint, things like that. So there absolutely is an opportunity to do modifications before the purchase. And we would certainly, NSP funds could certainly be used for that.
Okay, thanks.
All right, further questions or discussion? Is there a motion? Yeah, the staff is requesting direction to take the necessary steps. Oh, I think to read
Yeah,
this.
she's looking for direction.
So do you need a formal action from us? 'Cause you're coming back on the first, right?
Yeah, we will come back
So you
on
don't need anything
February
from us
1st.
tonight?
We would just like direction to
Yeah, is anyone
submit.
gonna tube this on the first?
And, yeah, and that'd be a lot of work for me, if you decided not to do it. But on February 1st, in that resolution, if the council would want to accept additional funds over the 2.6 million, we would have to put that in the resolution at that time. But it would be helpful to know.
Why wouldn't we?
Pardon?
Why wouldn't we not want to?
It's an option.
Yeah,
And
we'll take all the money.
Okay.
Leave not a dime on the table.
Okay, now council calendar, Ms. Richardson?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this is our first meeting after 25 years of incorporation, and you all should have pins up there at your desk, and I just wanted to congratulate you on 25 years. We were looking at our planning calendar, and it appears that we're not going to have any items for January 18th meeting, so if it is the council's discretion to cancel that meeting on the 18th if you so desire.
Is there any objection?
Kid.
And then also on
That'll be the order then, without objection.
take care of that. And then on January 19th, I just wanted to remind the council that that is the chamber installation dinner. And then the city offices will be closed on Monday in celebration of the Martin Luther King holiday.
All right, any questions on the calendar?
Yes, so just to be clear, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. So the next meeting will be on the 1st,
That's correct.
correct? Then there is a meeting scheduled for the 15th, correct? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm just going to let me know now that I will not be at that meeting, so I just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
All right, I will not be here on the 1st, but. All right, city manager report.
Just one point, I will be off next week, and Carol will be in charge during that time.
All right, so let that be a warning to all. Mr. Villegas will be acting, I'll be out of town, and so will Mr. Ross, Mr. Villegas, and Ms. Richardson will be running amok.
Hey, if Carol is in charge, we're going to be just fine.
That's right. But then you got me running the meeting.
City attorney report. Staff directions from members of the council. We have no future agenda item requests.
There's one thing I would I just want to bring it up to the city manager reminder. So on Jefferson Boulevard heading northbound, I noticed, and I mentioned to you a little bit about vehicles are now parking on Jefferson Boulevard right as the freeway on-ramp there, and I know that that's going to be potentially a dangerous situation if someone doesn't expect that, so just encourage
following
the
up on
staff
that.
to take a look at that. Yeah, thank you, Toby.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
It was moved by Mr. Ledesma, second by Mr. Johannesson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.